Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Fox by Sólveig Pálsdóttir, translated by Quentin Bates, narrated by Anne Richardson. She could see only the white flakes spinning towards her out of the darkness, and for a moment it occurred to her that it was time to give up, walk out into the teeth of the storm, and leave the snow to pile up and cover her. She could let herself drift into unconsciousness before they could catch up with her. She could fall asleep in the cold and dream her way to the warmth of home. She glanced into the mirror and moaned at the sight of her face, swollen, the cuts turning septic and the clumsy stitches. "I will," she whispered to herself, feeling the old determination return. "I will go home," she told herself, out loud this time, as a gust of wind made the car bounce. She gripped the wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white as she cautiously put her foot on the accelerator. February 1. The man sitting next to her had a friendly face. He was fair-haired, his beard bushy but neat, and he held a paper coffee cup in one hand. His eyes went from the aircraft's window to the back of the seat in front and back again. It looked as if he was trying to stare the flight out, just as she was. The turbulence started 10 minutes after takeoff. The aircraft juddered at first and then lurched as it lost height. Saji snatched at the man's hand and hot coffee spilled over him. "I'm so sorry," she said, letting go of his hand and transferring her grip to the seat's steel armrest. He took a serviette from the pocket of the seat and wiped off most of the spilled coffee. "Did it burn you?" she asked, mortified. "I'll wash your shirt for you." "It's all right," he said with a mild, beautiful smile. He was a handsome man, but there wasn't much expression to be seen. His hair was cropped close at the sides, but thick on top, and a fringe flopped over his forehead. He looked at her with curiosity. "You speak Icelandic?" "Just a little," she mumbled. That wasn't true, as she had a good command of the language, but often people failed to understand her because of her mouth. Right now, she hardly trusted herself to speak, not until she had solid ground under her feet again. "You're traveling alone?" he asked, leaning towards her. She nodded cautiously, not sure that she was ready to shift even slightly in her seat. "What takes you to the east at this time of year?" he asked politely, without seeming to pry. "Work," she gulped. "Where?" he asked. "At a beauty salon." "Really?" he said, with a note of surprise in his voice. "In Hop?" "Yes." He gave her a warm smile. "It'll be over soon. Just try to take deep breaths and relax," he said, patting her hand. "Don't try to fight it. Go with the plane's movement instead of tensing against it," he said sympathetically. She tried to follow his advice until the aircraft began to shudder again. Each shovelful dispatched more snow as it formed a white wall alongside the steps leading up to the olive-green two-story house on Hop's main street. Guðgeir Fransson, former Reykjavik police chief inspector, had rented the ground floor, an apartment that was big enough for a single person, although the low ceiling could sometimes make a tall man feel as if the walls were closing in. The place was halfway to being a cellar, but Guðgeir counted himself fortunate to have got the place, as the growing flow of tourists had resulted in a shortage of housing in Hop. The previous summer had seen records broken as more tourists than ever before had turned up, and even more were predicted for the next summer. So everyone who had an opportunity to rent out a room to tourists was busily doing just that. All the same, not many had turned up so far. The winter had been a hard one, and spring was still a long way off. That February morning it had turned unusually warm, so the snow was wet and heavy, and clearing it had become heavier work than usual. He worked as hard as he could, as if he were determined to set a speed record for clearing snow. His mental state always felt better for physical exertion. Since making the move to this quiet coastal town a day's drive from Reykjavik, he had made an effort to get daily exercise. He swam, walked a lot, and ran when the weather allowed it. His aim was to fall into an exhausted sleep every night. If he wasn't able to fall asleep quickly, thoughts of his old life and the pain of missing it would keep him awake far into the night, and he would imagine the person he loved asleep at his side, while he craved the warmth of her body beside him. Saji had little experience of traveling by air, or traveling at all. This was only the second time she had been anywhere. Before that had been the long journey all the way from Sri Lanka to Iceland. Now the aircraft's metal frame shivered and the lights above the seats flickered. People took deep breaths and small children wailed. Over the crying, she heard the pilot make an announcement over the loudspeaker. She wasn't able to make out his words, but sensed the tension around her. The aircraft dropped sharply, banked hard, and climbed so quickly that the airframe shook. She kept a tight grip on the armrest with one hand and reached with the other for the sick bag in the pocket in front of her. She vomited a slimy liquid containing the remains of the sandwich she had eaten at Reykjavik airport. She felt her companion lifting her hair with both hands away from her face while she retched into the bag. She remembered little more of the flight until the bumpy landing at Hupp's airport. Not a sound could be heard inside the aircraft, apart from the whine of the engines and the squeal of wheels on tarmac. The children had stopped crying, and the adults sat stiff in their seats. The aircraft taxied slowly up to the airport building, and a round of applause broke out as it came to a halt. She stood exhausted among the pale-faced passengers, waiting for her suitcase. The man who had been next to her on the flight came over, wearing a coat zipped halfway up. The dark brown stain on his shirt front gave her a pang of guilt. "Can I offer you a lift?" he asked. Saji was so taken by surprise that she declined, speaking in her own language before realizing what she had done. "No, thank you. I'm being picked up," she said in Icelandic. "I'm so sorry about the coffee." The man laughed and was about to say something else when a dark-haired older woman came to stand by them. "That was appalling," she fumed. "The plane should never have left Reykjavik." Others around joined in to agree with her, arguing loudly that passengers deserved counseling after a flight like that. The man took a card from his pocket and put it in Saji's hand. "Thank you," she said, looking at the drawing of a house overlooking a blue sea. The door was framed within a handsome portico and flanked by deep tubs filled with flowers. He looked at her questioningly. "Is it difficult to read?" Saji nodded. "I run a guest house here in Hopp called the Hostel by the Sea. If you're stuck, come to me," he said in a low voice. "My name's Thormúður." "Thank you," Saji said and backed away. She was sure there had to be a bad smell about her. There was vomit on her sweater and on the many-colored scarf around her neck. When her large black suitcase finally appeared, still wet with snow, she took herself to the toilets, relieved that nobody from her new workplace was there to see her. She unwound the colorful scarf, pulled off her sweater, and leaned over the sink to wash as well as she was able. She brushed her raven hair and put on a clean sweater from her suitcase. By the time she felt she was presentable, the arrivals area was practically deserted. Through the window she could see where her companion on the flight was standing by a Land Rover, and the angry woman with the dark hair was still talking, while the man had a look of resignation on his face. He finally got into the car and drove away, and before long there was only one car left outside the airport building. Hop was a place where heavy snow was nothing unusual, but this winter had been exceptional. It had begun to fall early in the autumn, just a few weeks after Guðgeir had been taken on by a small security company after many miserable months of searching for work. There were only 2 staff who took alternate shifts, and their paths almost never crossed. Guðgeir wasn't sure that the fledgling company would even stay afloat to the end of the year, but so far wages had been paid on time. The family had been left behind in Reykjavik, in the terraced house in Fossvogur. He would have preferred to have sold the place after the horror that had taken place there when his colleague and old friend Andres had become the victim of the killer they had been tracking, but Guðgeir's wife Inga hadn't been prepared to let the place go, at least not while things between them were so uncertain. She told him that it was just a house, and there were no memories stored in the concrete walls around them, while people had feelings, and they were the ones who needed to make sense of their own emotions in the aftermath of what had happened. For weeks he had kept to the shadows, hiding away in a room he rented out of town, and returned home when the worst of the storm had abated. They had tried to pick up where they had left off, to act as if nothing had happened, as if there had been no betrayal. The first and only time he had been unfaithful to Inga. A second's lapse of judgment had triggered a series of horrific events, with the end of all this still not in sight. The pain was too sharp for them to be able to talk to each other, and their home life turned into a poor imitation of what it had once been. The harsh note of accusation was never far away, in both Inga's voice and that of the 2 youngsters, as Guðgeir was constantly racked with guilt. An atmosphere of brooding silence had replaced the positive closeness of the family home. When there had been an offer of a job in Hop, Inga had made it plain that he should take it. They could examine their feelings again at the end of the 1-year contract. Guðgeir felt that a year was too long a time and tried to convince her, but she wouldn't be swayed. Now he could see that Inga had been right to hang on to the house. It made sense to wait with the big decisions until they had reached some sort of balance once more. Their existence had been in turmoil. Over a short time, everything had changed, and lives had been lost. Sometimes he wondered if the Hop weather was some kind of a symbol of the turbulence in his own life, as it could rarely be predicted and often turned wild. There had hardly been a full week without a blind blizzard descending, and several times avalanches had blocked the Kvalnesskriðr road to the east. In between the falls of heavy snow, there had been days when the temperature lifted and things began to thaw. Then there was every chance of a downpour of rain before it froze again. The streets were so slippery with ice that getting from one house to the next could be a challenge. 2. It was too cold to wait outside in the February darkness, so she sat on a sofa upholstered in fake black leather. Surely the man would be here soon to collect her. A burly man with brush-cut hair was finishing some paperwork behind the reception desk. "That was quite a landing," he called out and disappeared through a door with a box in his arms. Saji nodded her head in agreement, but the man was already gone. She was alone in the arrivals lounge and closed her eyes. A few minutes passed and she was almost asleep when she realized the man was speaking again from where he sat tapping at a computer behind the desk. "It was pretty bad and the passengers don't like it, but there was never any real danger," he said. "It's rarely like this in Hop, so it's understandable that some people get more upset than others." He laughed again and went back to his work. For a while, only the whine of the wind could be heard. Saji checked her phone. Nobody had called or sent a message, so she walked over to the window and stared out. "Can I help you?" the man asked, looking up from his computer screen. Saji hesitated and looked down. Her long black hair fell over her face. "You understand Icelandic?" the man asked, as if he had only just registered her appearance, switching to English. "Can I help you?"
"Yes, I speak Icelandic,"
Saji replied, pleased that he could understand her. Often she had to repeat each sentence, which could be exhausting. Sometimes it was easiest to say as little as possible.
"I've lived here for a few years."
She stood up and went over to the window again. There was nothing to be seen in the parking lot, so she took out her phone, but could reach neither Kristin nor Lou. After a couple of unsuccessful attempts, she went back to the sofa.
"Could you help me get a taxi?"
she asked, tucking her hair back behind her ears.
"There's so much snow that I won't be able to carry my case if nobody comes to collect me. I don't understand what's wrong. I've tried to call again and again."
"There's no taxi around here. There was a couple in Hup who ran a taxi, but they gave up in the autumn. Hopefully someone will start up in the spring," the man said. "Where are you going?"
"It's a local beauty salon,"
Saji said, repeating the words in English as the man raised an eyebrow. "Understood," he said with a laugh. "I'm Sven, by the way." He laughed again, but not at her. It seemed to be a habit, finishing each sentence with a short snort of laughter.
"My name is Saji," she said, trying to smile. "It's sometimes difficult to speak clearly because of this," she said, touching her upper lip with her index finger and covering her mouth. It was an old habit she struggled to break. As a youngster, she had not only covered her mouth to speak to strangers, but had let her thick hair fall over her face like a curtain. "Couldn't you get that seen to?" Sven asked. "It doesn't look that bad. Probably wouldn't even have known it was there if you'd had treatment right away." He hesitated and barked with laughter. "Well, these plastic surgeons are so smart, they can do pretty much anything," he said, looked ready to laugh again, and stopped himself, as if realizing that it was time to let the subject die. "My father didn't have much money," Saji said. "Things in Sri Lanka are very different."
She said no more, knowing that people frequently didn't give themselves time to listen to anything more than the most straightforward explanation, either interrupting her or else letting their attention wander. She ran a finger under the hair tucked behind her ear and let it fall over her face. His attention went back to the desk in front of him. "Is that right that you're going to a beauty salon?" he asked after a pause, looking up at her.
"Yes, I'm starting work there," Saji assured him. "I'll be doing pedicures, massages, and that kind of thing. I'm good at this kind of work and learned it all at a really good salon. Lakmal would only have the best people working at his place."
She hesitated when she saw that Sven had a curious look on his face and assumed that he hadn't understood. "And what's this salon called, the one you're going to work at?" Sven asked with the usual laugh, this time a little forced.
"It's called Hop Beauty," she said. "It's on the main street."
"I don't know the place. This isn't a big town, and I know pretty much everyone here."
"Wait a moment," Saji said, fumbling for the phone.
She quickly scrolled through the messages and showed him the old phone's cracked screen.
"I'm going to buy myself a new one when I have been paid,"
she said apologetically, searching for the right message.
"I think it's this one."
Sven took the phone and read the message. His brow furrowed and he squinted to read it a second time. "Hup Beauty," he said out loud. "I've never heard of it," he said, and this time his laugh sounded forced. "Is that all?"
"No," she said and shook her head. "There are 2 more messages. They're next. Look."
A heavy finger tapped at the phone. I had forgotten how difficult it was to read anything on these tiny screens.
He muttered, elbows on the desk. He moved the phone closer to see it better.
Then there's more from the same number.
That's right, Saji said. It says that Christine, who owns the salon, will meet me at the airport.
I see that. Then there's the same text as the other messages,
he said, and passed the phone back to her, a serious look on his face.
I know a few people of that name, but not anyone in this kind of business. You didn't get any paperwork? A business card or a leaflet like the ones over there?
No, just text messages, she said, shaking her head. But Lou, the woman who rented at the same place as me in Reykjavik, said it's a good place to work, she said, lowering her voice without finishing what she had meant to say.
Lou?
Sven asked, clearly intrigued. She's Chinese and helps me read the messages because I don't read Icelandic. Lou helped me book the ticket for the flight here.
And what's her link to this salon?
Her friend worked there but had to leave. I'm supposed to take over her work and the apartment where she lived.
So that's the way it is, Sven said, looking at her and scratching the back of his neck. So you can't read what's here in your phone?
He asked, hesitating as if he were anxious not to offend her. No, Saji replied. Well, of course I read Sinhala and write to my family.
Do you have a return flight booked?
He asked, tapping at the computer to check.
Look, it says here, he read out in a clear voice, to Saji. Can you come and work for us right away, 27th February? Good wages and apartment. Best regards, Hop Beauty. I have to say the wording is very strange. Who sent you this message?
Kristin, the man who owns the salon, Saji replied, twisting the ring on her index finger, a narrow gold rope. Lou told her friend about me because she had a problem. Her relative in China is very ill and she had to leave. Lou asked me if I could take the job, and I was so pleased. Then this message came. There are 4 women working there, so it will be good for me because I work alone and don't know many people. And I don't have to write anything because the man looks after all that kind of thing. Kristin, she said with a sigh.
Hop isn't a big town. You're sure about all this?
Yes. Read it yourself, she said shortly, irritated by his questions.
Sven looked through the messages again. There's a third message from the same number,
he said, concentrating on the screen. Yes, Saji said eagerly. The one that says Kristin, who owns the salon, will pick me up at the airport.
That's right, and with the date and time, Sven said.
He put the phone down, crossed his arms, and looked at her with concern.
Then there's the same text again, exactly the same as in the other messages. I don't want to be unpleasant, but like I said, I know most people here and don't know anyone who runs a beauty salon. Could you have misunderstood?
She quickly looked down at the tiled floor. The remnants of slush ice were melting there into a brown puddle. She was tired and out of sorts after the flight. On top of that, a nervous feeling was gathering inside her.
But what do I know?
He said quickly, hoping to lift her spirits. He was the type who liked people around him to be happy, always ready to help and to make every effort to solve any problem.
Have you tried to call the number?
Yes, of course, many times, and I've tried to call Lou, but her phone is out of range.
Let's give Adelisa a call, Sven said, turning back to the computer. She's the only beautician I know of around here.
He punched numbers into the phone and offered it to her. She took it and after a moment's thought passed it back to him. Would you speak for me? Sometimes people don't understand me easily."
"Of course," he said and turned away. Saji watched in agitation as he walked back and forth as he talked. "Adalisa has never heard of this place," he said eventually. "She works by herself and shuts the doors when she takes time off," he said, and stood for a moment in thought. "To tell you the truth, I don't know what the best thing to do is. You're welcome to have a ride into town with me later. It's a bit of a distance," he said, glancing at his watch. "Between us, we ought to be able to get to the bottom of this." He gave her a look that was supposed to be encouraging, but this time there was no laughter. 3. Worried and frightened, she sat on the couch to wait, staring out at the snow, the empty car park, and the distant mountain peaks. She tried to push aside the uncomfortable feeling that she had been duped. Sven strode over to her and picked up the black suitcase. "Shall we be on our way?" he asked cheerfully. She looked at him in confusion for a moment as she gathered her wits. She stood up, zipped her coat up to her neck, and went out into the cold. Darkness was already falling as they drove away from the airport, and flakes of snow spun past in the wind. Posts with reflectors attached to them showed the way until the street lights of Hop appeared. Sven stopped at a few places, either making phone calls or knocking on doors, while Saji waited in the car. There was nobody to be found who remembered offering her work. "It doesn't look promising," he said after the last call, turning up the heater as he noticed her shivering.
"Could you drive me to this place?" she asked, holding out the card that Thormuther had handed her.
"Sure," Sven said with relief and his habitual bark of laughter. "I need to be on my way home as well, and I hope it all gets sorted out for you." She nodded and stared out through the windscreen. The road passed through the town, almost down to the harbor and the boats at the quays. Sven turned and drove along a row of low terraced houses. The hostel was at the end of the row, and it didn't look as smart as the picture on the card Saji had been given.
"I'll look after myself from here," she said, opening the car door. "Thank you for your help."
She was about to say more, but Sven had already got out of the car to open the boot. "You don't want me to come inside with you?" he called to her, lugging her suitcase to the door where the flower pots were almost buried by snow.
"No, that's fine," she said firmly. "It'll be fine. Thank you."
"Sure?"
"Yes, of course,"
she said in a clear tone, waving him goodbye. "All right, then. I'm sure it'll sort itself out," he replied. "Good luck." Her companion from the flight stood behind an old-fashioned reception desk with the phone to his ear. Still wearing his coat, he looked busy.
"Hello again. Are you on the way out?" Saji asked, stamping the snow from her shoes. "I'm so sorry. I'm making a mess."
"Don't worry about it. Good to see you," he said, coming around to the front of the desk. "Welcome to the hostel by the sea." He bowed his head courteously and put his hands together as if he wanted to offer her some kind of Asian welcome. "You need a room?"
"Yes, at least for tonight," she said. "How much does it cost?"
She was unable to hide the concern in her voice. "We always have the best prices," he said, slipping out of his coat. "There are no tourists at the moment, so we have plenty of empty rooms. If you clean up after yourself, then I won't charge you."
"I can pay,"
she said quickly.
"I just hadn't expected to have to find a place to stay."
"Really? Is there a problem?" he asked, stroking his neatly trimmed beard.
"I think so. It looks like there was some misunderstanding about the job," she said.
"You're in trouble, then?"
"Yes," she said slowly. "Maybe there isn't a job."
"Really? That's a shame," he said with concern as he took a set of keys from a hook. Who offered you this job?
A man called Kristen, but his phone's dead, so is the woman's, the one I was supposed to be working for.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?